Undercover boss orders breakfast at food court. Calf freezes when he hears Waitress lives on instant noodles. You can't sit here. A short sentence, but it hit the thick afternoon air like a cold slap. The voice was sharp as a blade, steady and unshaken. It came from behind the counter of a small cafe tucked into the busiest corner of the Sunrise food court, the largest dining hub in Midtown. Outside, the sunlight blazed through the glass roof, making the tile floors glisten like polished chrome. But inside, amid the crowd searching for a seat, the new Dawn Calf Branch 42 had a strange chill. Not from the air conditioning, but from how people looked at one another. Michael Foster, 50 years old, stepped in like any other ordinary customer. He wore a faded khaki jacket, rolled-up jeans, and a fraying baseball cap, his usual disguise that let him blend easily with the crowd. No one recognized him. No cameras. No assistants. No sign that this was a major CEO. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He placed a glass of water on a table near the window where he could observe nearly the entire cafe. Just minutes earlier, he'd walked the entire food court in silence, listening to spoons clink on ceramic to greetings recited like tired scripts. But when he reached New Dawn, something stopped him. It wasn't the coffee aroma. It wasn't the menu. It was the atmosphere. Something that felt choked by attitude. He had barely sat down when a woman's voice rang out cold, hollow, and judgmental. This seat's not for you. A woman in a black shirt name tag, Linda, arms crossed, stood less than 2 meters away. Her eyes scanned every wrinkle on his face, every scuff on his worn sneakers. This was not the look of someone serving. This was the look of someone judging. Michael said nothing. He gave a slight nod and looked out the window at the shadows of people rushing by, unaware, indifferent. It had been nearly 2 years since his last in-person inspection. New Dawn now had over 120 branches nationwide, but lately a string of all good reports felt too clean. The numbers looked fine. But his instinct, the same instinct that had saved him more than once from the edge of collapse, told him something was off. And as any seasoned CEO knows, nothing is more dangerous than a branch that looks fine but is hollow inside. He'd picked this location because of its strategic position intersecting train lines, a civic center, and a nearby college campus. This place was supposed to be a flagship, fast, friendly, and humane. But he saw none of that. From how the staff spoke to each other to how they barely glanced at customers, everything felt like a tired performance. Michael took a sip of water. His hand rested lightly on a crumpled paper menu. Around him, the espresso machine hissed, but it couldn't drown out the unwelcoming stares from behind the counter. A group of students laughed at a nearby table. A middle-aged man tapped away on his laptop. An elderly woman quietly nibbled toast. No one noticed him, and no one noticed that a major decision was about to be made here quietly in this modest cafe. A decision not drawn from revenue forecasts or boardroom charts, but from the attitude of one employee and how a cafe responds when they think a guest is a nobody. And then it happened. Linda, the woman who had rejected him, stepped closer. That same thin smile. That same distant gaze. Her voice sharpened. I already told you. This area's for regulars. If you're not ordering, please give up the table. One heartbeat passed. Michael locked eyes with her, and he knew the test had begun. Linda Walker. She stood as if summoned by the system itself. Black shirt crisp pressed. Name tag pinned slightly off-center. High heels clicked with purpose on white tile. She stopped in front of his table, eyes scanning like a lint inspector on silk. Arms crossed. Not to welcome. To judge. Sir, please stand. Her voice soft, almost polite, but so cold the whole room seemed to fall quiet. This section is for loyal customers. She didn't raise her voice, but each word landed steadily, as if reminding a man he didn't belong here. Michael looked up. His gaze met those cold brown pupils directly. No rebuttal. No surprise. Just the calm eyes of a man who had heard countless rejections and seen hundreds of versions of Linda in many different forms across his 30 years in the service industry. Behind her, two other employees, one drying a glass, the other straightening the pastry shelf, glanced at each other, then lowered their heads, smirking. No greeting, no awkwardness. Everyone acted like this was just another day. Michael didn't move. He gently rested his hand on the table and tapped with his index knuckle as if counting time or waiting to see how the next act would unfold. Linda frowned. Her eyes narrowed as if trying to decipher whether this man was ignorant or subtly defiant. She lowered her voice this time, firmer. "Did you hear me, sir? We reserve this area for regular customers. If you don't place an order within 5 minutes, I'll have to ask you to move." Michael didn't answer. His gaze shifted past her to the far corner of the cafe where a young waitress was pouring water at a nearby table. She was in her early 20s, thin hair tied in a hurry, dark circles under her eyes, like someone who hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. He caught her eyes just as she glanced toward him too. A fleeting moment. But in that brief look, a flicker of something unspoken and quickly withdrawn, Michael made his decision. He would not stand up. Not out of pride. Not out of ego. But because something told him to stay to listen. To hear something that no internal report would ever reveal. Linda exhaled sharply in frustration and turned away toward the counter. As she walked off, she muttered loud enough for nearby customers to hear another old man who thinks this is a public park. A few chuckles broke out behind the counter. A young customer at the next table looked over at Michael with sympathy, but then turned back to scrolling his phone as if used to this sight, someone being judged unworthy of belonging. Michael picked up the menu, flipping through the pages. Garlic toast, hand-brewed black coffee waffles with cream, the very items that once built the reputation of New Dawn, now printed on a wrinkled sheet, faded ink stained with a dried coffee smudge. This was no longer the experience he had committed to. This was internal decay. And he knew you don't see that on Zoom calls. A minute later, a male server approached, name tag crookedly pinned Joe. He held a tray. His voice was sharp and dismissive. "We don't serve people like you." Michael looked up. No anger. No surprise. Just the faintest smile, the kind you wear when you've heard exactly what you were waiting for. A light footstep came from behind. Then the soft clink of a tray landing on wood metal on table, gentle but deliberate. "If you don't order, we don't serve." The voice wasn't loud, but just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. It was Joe, the young server, about 27. Uniform wrinkled. Name tag tilted. He leaned down, not out of courtesy, but to invade, space exert control. His eyes flicked to the menu on the table, then locked back on Michael as if daring him to flinch. Michael looked up. His gaze calm, cold, not harsh, not angry. Just steady like midday sunlight blocked by a thick sheet of glass. "I'm reading the menu," he said evenly. No one knew this was the voice of a man who had trained hundreds of managers, who had once lectured on the philosophy of heartfelt service in conferences people like Joe had never been invited to. Joe sneered, half smiling. He turned and walked away, leaving behind a shrug that said it all men like him aren't worth the time. The space around him began to fracture. From the corner table, a couple stopped chewing when they overheard the exchange. A young woman scrolling her phone raised an eyebrow. No one said a word, but their eyes shifted. No longer indifferent, they were watching now, as if sensing that injustice was seeping into the air. A gentle whiff of roasted coffee drifted from the bar, blended with the scent of freshly baked pastries. It should have been the aroma of comfort of a peaceful midday corner, but now it was swallowed by coldness, by the invisible wall of judgment. Michael lightly turned the menu, his hand still calm and composed. But deep in his eyes, something flickered to life, not anger, but a quiet, growing disappointment. Every item on the menu was familiar. Medium roast Ethiopian coffee,
soft-boiled eggs with dark rye toast,
waffles with maple syrup, each name a fragment of the dream he once built. And now they were served by people who didn't even look customers in the eye.
A few minutes passed.
No one brought water. No one checked in. Michael sat there, a ripple in the still artificial surface of a calf chain once proud of its service. Then from the bar, Linda Walker glanced in his direction. She said nothing, but her expression clearly showed her annoyance. Beside her, Joe was recounting something in a tone half amused, half contemptuous, and when Linda nodded, the atmosphere sank another degree colder. Just then, Anna, the young server Michael had noticed earlier, approached his table. She held a jug of water in a small glass. "Would you like some water, sir?" Her voice was gentle. Her eyes unsure. Michael nodded. "Thank you, dear." Anna set the glass down but didn't rush off. Her eyes lingered as if she wanted to say something. But from the bar, Linda barked, "Anna, what are you doing? That table isn't even reserved." Anna bowed her head, mumbled an apology, and hurried away. The tray in her hands trembled slightly, catching the light from the glass ceiling. Michael was silent. In that moment, he knew the issue here was not just that one customer was treated poorly. This was a culture rotting from the inside, a system that had allowed disdain to become the norm. He sat still, but his heart was pounding like a drum. Not from hurt, but because he saw himself from years ago walking into places like this, believing with all his might that the mission of fairness at New Dawn Calf would never be lost. But here, in one of his very own branches, fairness had been taken off the wall and replaced with stares of judgment. Then, unexpectedly, someone stood up from the table near the window. It was the elderly woman, the one who'd been quietly eating her toast and sipping a lukewarm cappuccino. No one had noticed her until now. She had caused no scene, uttered no words, blended in like part of the background. But now she walked toward Michael's table.
Slowly, steadily.
She gently placed a handkerchief on the tabletop, then turned toward the bar. "Young man," her voice rang out, not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. "If no one has taught you what it means to respect your elders, then today I will be the first." The entire calf froze. Joe's head snapped up, unable to believe his ears. Linda went stiff. A few staff members dropped their spoons, and Anna stared wide-eyed, nearly holding her breath. The old woman turned to Michael, smiling kindly, and for the first time that afternoon, the light through the skylight shone on a truly warm face. "I don't know who you are," she said softly, "but I know this: if the way they treat you isn't corrected, then this calf doesn't deserve to exist." She placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, then calmly returned to her seat. The peace in her eyes made everything around her pause. Linda stepped out from behind the counter, her voice faltering slightly. "Ma'am, this is an internal matter. You shouldn't intervene." "I'm not intervening," the old woman replied without turning back. "I'm reminding. And reminders are never wrong, especially when hearts have lost their way."
A gentle round of applause came from the right corner.
It was a middle-aged man in a blue shirt sitting with his young daughter. He placed his hand on the table and nodded as if in agreement. Then followed the clink of glasses, the shuffle of chairs, whispers spreading like waves. No one shouted. No one erupted. It was a quiet wave of awakening slipping into every corner. Michael clenched the handkerchief in his palm. On the soft fabric was a delicate white embroidery. "Fairness begins with how we see a person, not the clothes they wear." No one knew who the elderly woman was. No one knew why she carried that handkerchief. But that sentence hit Michael's heart like a bell of reckoning. And in that very moment, he made a decision. A decision that would change the course of this entire branch. And more than that, it would reshape the founding values he had once embedded into every brick of New Dawn Calf. Michael Foster sat still for a beat longer. Then he exhaled slowly, as if he too needed a pause before the storm about to unfold. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket. One tap. No one noticed until he raised the phone to his ear and his deep voice rang out through the silence. "Emily. Initiate Protocol 7. On the other end, a sharp but steady female voice replied, standing by Mr. Foster. Michael closed the phone and stood up. He didn't raise his voice, but each of his steps sounded like the ticking of a fateful clock. He took off his faded baseball cap, the one thing that had hidden his identity for over an hour in this calf. Lifting his head, Michael looked directly at Linda, not with punishment, but with a gaze that exposed the truth. "I'm Michael Foster," he said. There was no need to speak louder. The entire calf was holding its breath. Founder of New Dawn Calf, the man who built this chain with one single hope to create a place where people are served with kindness, not sorted by how they look. Linda stood frozen. Her face turned pale as if the blood had drained from her. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Behind her, Joe held a tray in shaking hands. The ice clinked against the glass, betraying the panic rising inside him. A middle-aged woman at a nearby table slowly set her coffee down, her eyes wide as she murmured, "It really is him, Michael Foster." No one answered. Because the entire room had been stripped of air. Even the wall clock seemed to stop ticking. Michael took another step toward the bar, where Linda still stood as if turned to stone. When a customer is treated the way I was today, it means there were hundreds before me who suffered in silence. He looked around the calf, his eyes pausing on each face. Fairness cannot be hung on the wall in fancy slogans. It must be poured into every cup of coffee and shown in every smile to every person who walks through that door. Then he stopped. Placing both hands on the bar, he said slowly but firmly, "As of today, this branch will temporarily shut down." Linda's mouth dropped open. Joe dropped the tray. The sound of metal hitting the floor rang out like the bell that ends a performance. "All employees will be reevaluated from the beginning," he continued without pausing. "Anyone who doesn't align with the core values is invited to leave New Dawn." Each word was like a cold blade, but also like a precise chisel scraping away the mold that had clung to the dream he once built. And then a single clap echoed from the corner of the calf. It was the elderly woman with silver hair. She was still seated unchanged in posture, but her eyes sparkled as if a final ray of sunlight had just broken through the glass ceiling. Then came the second clap from the man in the blue shirt, who had until now remained quietly bowed. Then a third, a fourth, not loud, not boastful. Just slow, deep, steady applause, like the rhythm of a heart nodding in agreement with justice finally brought to light. Michael stood still in the center, not wearing a victorious smile. Only his eyes, the eyes of a man who had just wiped off a thick layer of dust covering his heart. Amid the spreading applause, the calf's glass door swung open. Two people entered. A woman in a white shirt wearing a name tag, Emily Fan, Regional Operations Director. Beside her, a middle-aged man with an open laptop, its screen reflecting internal dashboards and performance data. No words were exchanged. They simply nodded at Michael and headed straight to a table near the bar. They opened the laptop and began typing. The scene resembled a small-scale audit, clearly pre-planned, triggered by a single phone call. Linda took a step back. Not from fear, but from disorientation. Once the one giving orders now, she had become the one being watched. Everything familiar was suddenly reversed. Emily looked up at Michael and handed him a piece of paper. It was the secret customer evaluation report, an anonymous service quality assessment. Michael nodded silently. He didn't need to read it. Instead, he turned toward Anna, the only staff member who had offered him a glass of water at the start. "What's your name?" he asked. Anna Tran," she replied softly but clearly. Michael pulled a white envelope from his jacket and placed it in her hands. Stamped in gold, New Dawn headquarters. "Inside is a temporary appointment," he said, voice steady. "You will be the one retained to represent the spirit of New Dawn during this branch's transition. That is, if you accept." Anna said nothing. She just held the envelope tightly in both hands as if grasping something more precious than any reward trust. At that moment, the desk phone behind the counter rang sharply. Joe instinctively reached for it, but Michael raised a hand, stopping him. Emily picked up instead. A male voice, mid-aged and tense, came through. "Hello, I'm the investment director currently in a board meeting. There's a rumor about a branch shutdown. Is that true? Who authorized this?" Emily didn't look at anyone. She simply replied with one sentence, "The founder." And then she hung up without waiting. Everyone in the calf was no longer just a spectator. They had become part of something larger, a transformation unfolding right before their eyes. Michael walked toward the door, not in a hurry. Before leaving, he turned back and looked at the entire space one last time. His gaze landed on a young boy sitting with his mother in a quiet corner. The boy looked up at him, not with fear, but with admiration. Michael gave a slight nod, like a promise, that this place would be rebuilt so that one day when that boy grows up and walks into this cafe, he would never feel less than anyone else. He pushed the door open. The midday sunlight spilled across the tiled floor, casting long shadows behind each of his steps, like a beam of light stretching from the past into the future. Michael Foster stood tall, sunlight streaming through the large glass window, lighting a bright line down the bridge of his nose. He didn't shout, didn't need to be angry. But each word that came from his mouth was a command, a wake-up call for a system that had fallen asleep. Effective immediately, all staff at this branch are suspended for 48 hours pending an internal investigation into discriminatory behavior and violation of service culture. The space fell into total silence. The back door of the cafe opened. Emily entered, followed by three others. They wore regional HR uniforms, white shirts, dark blue folders in hand. On each folder cover was the unmistakable embossed gold emblem of New Dawn headquarters. Emily placed the stack of files on the counter. No one asked questions. No introductions were given. She opened the first page, pushed it toward Linda. Notice of temporary closure of the branch for violation of service culture standards. Effective immediately. Linda's hands trembled as she took it. No more reactions. No more excuses. Only the pale look on her face as if she knew this moment had always been coming. Joe tried to step back, but stumbled into a chair. His service tray crashed to the ground. No one helped. No one cared. Every eye in the cafe was now on Michael the founder and the only one with the authority to decide. He stepped to the center of the cafe, his gaze sweeping across the staff. The reason I'm doing this, he said slowly, is not because of poor revenue. Not because of customer complaints, but because you've forgotten how to look another person in the eye. That sentence, like a thin blade, sharp yet bloodless. It cut through all pretense, all convenient excuses, all averted gazes. At a table by the window, a boy about 9 held his mother's hand and whispered, "Is that really the owner, Mom?" His mother only nodded, lips pressed tightly in emotion. Michael turned to Anna, the only one who had shown kindness. She stood beside the water dispenser, still holding her tray, eyes brimming with tears, not from fear, but because for the first time she had seen someone keep their promise to the mission they created. He signaled to Emily. She nodded. A member of the HR team stepped forward to speak. Starting tomorrow, this New Dawn branch will undergo reform. Those with a spirit of service will be invited back, but only after completing a 24-hour retraining program under the direct guidance of Mr. Michael Foster. The sound of typing echoed from the back. Data was being retrieved. Internal cameras were being reviewed. The cafe had turned into a public courtroom, but with no judge. Only truth and actions to measure it. An older employee named Thomas, who had sat quietly at the bar all this time, stepped forward. He removed his uniform cap and bowed before Michael. I didn't realize things had gone this far. I used to believe in New Dawn because of how you once spoke about justice. Michael looked at him, then nodded. Then I hope you'll be the one to help me rebuild it from the inside. The answer left Thomas frozen. But just a second later, he clenched the cap tightly in his hand and nodded firmly. As if he had just been handed a second chance not only at his job, but at reclaiming his dignity. Outside, the sunlight had softened. No longer harsh like midday. Inside, faces began to change. No longer panic or defensiveness, but reflection, awareness, and perhaps the beginning of a transformation long overdue. Michael stepped behind the counter. He tied on the apron himself. That simple gesture made everyone hold their breath. For the next 2 days, he said, I'll be the one making the first cup of coffee each morning. Anyone who wants to relearn how to serve another human being, come here. But come with sincerity, not because of an employment contract. The entire cafe fell silent after Michael's words. The air hung between two breaths as if waiting for something truly meaningful to shift. And then a soft sound echoed in the room. A metal chair scraped lightly against the tile floor. It was Joe. The young employee from earlier, the one who had scoffed who made him wait for a menu like he was invisible, was now standing, both hands clenched in front of him, throat dry, but his eyes no longer looked away. Mr. Foster Joe's voice trembled, almost whispering, "I know I was wrong. I have no excuse. But if you'll allow me, I want to stay. Not to keep my job, but to relearn the right way." Everyone turned to look at Joe. No one expected him to be the first to step forward. Michael remained behind the counter, the simple apron still on, showing no signs of anger or satisfaction. He just looked at Joe for a long time. Then he slowly nodded, "All right." "But no special treatment?" Joe nodded hard, his eyes red. "I don't need special treatment, sir. Just a chance." Emily stepped forward, placing a packet of documents in Joe's hands. "Training starts tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp. If you're late, it means you've refused this chance." Joe held the folder with both hands as if it were a ticket to redemption. Gone was the arrogance. Only silence remained, and a rare sincerity in a young man who had just experienced his first true fall. From the corner of the cafe, another employee, Clara, who had been silently working like a machine all morning, stepped out from behind the counter. She slowly removed her gloves and walked to face Michael. "Do you still have room for someone who's not great with words but wants to start over?" Michael didn't answer right away. He simply extended his hand, a quiet gesture without fuss.
Claire placed her hand in his.
That handshake small, but it changed the atmosphere of the entire cafe. One by one, face by face, a new light appeared in their eyes, not fear of losing their job, but the sense of being guided back to where they once dreamed of being. And for the observers, it was a moment of healing. A new morning would come, but it wouldn't begin with the hiss of a coffee machine. It would begin with a promise kept, an attitude relearned, and a culture rebuilt, not from a manual, but from within the people themselves. Michael had just removed the apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter when a soft voice called from the far corner, "Uncle Michael." He turned. A young woman stood there nervously twisting the hem of her worn uniform. It was Sophie, 21 years old, a final-year finance student, part-time barista, at the cafe. She hesitated, eyes avoiding his, but her hands held firm. I just wanted to say thank you. Even if I might lose my job today, I still want to thank you." Michael slowly walked toward her. The surrounding space fell utterly quiet, as if reserving the silence for one heartfelt truth that was about to be spoken. Sophie bit her lip, took a deep breath, then rushed her words as if afraid she'd lose the courage if she stopped. "For the past 3 months, I've only been eating instant noodles. After each shift, I could only afford 1 pack of noodles and 1 egg. Sometimes I had to split that to last an entire day." She lowered her head. No one laughed. Only a silence so deep you could hear the ceiling fan spinning gently above. Michael stood still. Then he leaned down, gently placed his hand on Sophie's shoulder, not with authority, but with the empathy of someone who had once walked through hardship. "Tomorrow, Sophie, you'll be the first to join the new training program."
She looked up at him, eyes red and glassy.
He continued, clearly, slowly, but loud enough to echo to every corner of the room, "You deserve more than just instant noodles. You deserve a workplace that listens. And I'm sorry that my cafe allowed you to live like that without anyone noticing." No one said a word. Then, from the right corner of the cafe, an elderly man in a gray suit placed his newspaper down and clapped. Once, slowly. The second clap came from the pregnant woman sitting alone by the glass window. Then the third. No one cheered. No one shouted. But each clap was like a balm, soothing the invisible wounds that Sophie and so many others had silently carried. Not because someone got fired, but because finally someone chose to listen. Michael nodded gently at Sophie. He didn't need to say anything more. She understood, and so did everyone else in the cafe. He turned toward the door. A breeze drifted in from outside, carrying the scent of new leaves and the fragrance of early summer blooms. He didn't close the door. He just left it ajar, as if leaving behind an unspoken invitation: "If you are brave enough to change, this door will always be open." As he stepped over the threshold, the late afternoon sunlight spilled sideways, casting a long shadow behind him. But in the hearts of those left behind, there was light. Not from the sun, but from awakening. I don't need to be treated like a special guest. I need to see my employees treated as real human beings. Michael Foster, a true CEO, doesn't just build systems. He rebuilds dignity in every overlooked corner of that system. When a 21-year-old girl is finally allowed to speak the truth and is heard, that isn't just justice. That is hope. And sometimes fixing the smallest things gives the audience a deeper sense of fulfillment than any loud punishment ever could.